Welcome to Elevated Mission channel. We are here for the Ruggles Roundup. Super excited to be here with you guys again. Of course, with my lovely co-host, Ian Ruggles. Ian, welcome into the studio.
Glad to be here. Excited to talk more football as we're getting ready for the football season that's just right around the corner.
Absolutely. We're going to talk all kinds of football stuff. But I did want to bring up, I was just telling you off air that I've been on Elevated Mission on the side of peak performance. We're looking into a lot of technologies, working with some different folks on the mind, so neurology utilized for peak performance. And so I was working with some guys that had some programming that goes into some VR type settings. And they were just showing me, and actually I'm downloading it at the moment right now for VR that I've got at the house to kind of check this out and to really see how, try to utilize it for myself. And they were like, go try it out. Like, we want you to see how it works and how it functions and all that. And so, but they're talking about that they've actually got programs that can either stimulate your brain if you need more stimulation right before you hit the court or the field, or calm you down and bring that escalation level down a little bit, and that they can show through white papers and everything where they've got the actual research and the data that this is actually improving performance on the field in immediate fashion. So the one super interesting thing that I think our listeners will this will be kind of a fun topic to talk about a little bit, is if you do that right before you hit the field, significant increases in performance. If you go to social media or anything between that time, it kind of wipes it all out. So you got to go directly from that, and then you can go do your warm-ups or whatever, but you got to go from that to competition, and you can't really engage your phone or whatever. You need to take this technology that gets your brain into the right spot, kind of get you in the zone, and then go to competition. And if you go to social media, it's going to kind of wipe out the benefits that you just gain. So anyways, super exciting stuff. I'm really interested in utilizing these kind of technologies to help athletes and coaches get to their peak performance. But anyways, I just thought I'd throw it out there for a little bit of conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really cool topic just when it comes to getting into the mental. We've gotten so far in the physical side of sports fitness and getting people to, as much explosion as they can out of their leg muscles, and how fast, how quick twitch can you make those different muscle groups. Now working on the mind is something that can really advance as well, as I know sports have not focused nearly as much on the mind as they've focused on the body, as getting those VRs is probably one of the best equipments. I remember going to college football and us utilizing computer programs to help us study football and get ready for football games and certain stuff like that. VR seems like it would be just the next step in that, of just being really immersed in getting ready for a football game. It seems really cool. And then you were talking about social media, which I thought was an interesting topic to talk about. Just social media before a game, it looks like it's horrible for you to do before a game. Get you completely out of the mindset of the game. You could almost give it an example of, it's like jumping in an ice bath after you've warmed up for the game, as you've already gotten yourself mentally prepared for the game, and then you just completely take yourself out by getting on social media. That might be a good little tip and trick for any kind of high school athlete or college athlete that's trying to get that little extra edge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's funny is that in this topic, I just think about, I was at an NFL game, I don't know, a few weeks ago, a preseason game, obviously, but and I put out something on my story on Instagram, and it was right before the game, and then I saw actually one of the players that I'm friends with get on and like my post right as they were coming out to the field to play. And then they went on and had a great game in the preseason game and all that. So obviously you can overcome some of those things anyways. But I was also made me think, I kind of hope that was his wife or whoever that may manage his Instagram account, them doing it, not him, right before he's going out on the field, liking my post. I appreciate the like, though. That's for sure.
Absolutely, but I think it's definitely an interesting topic to just get into of just using all the tools that we have now to get the mind as far as it can. I think we get more and more into advancing and perfecting each and every aspect of the sport and perfecting the training on the body. Now, perfecting the training on the mind is something that I think is something that has lagged behind in the last 10 to 20 years. And I think that we could definitely play a little bit of catch up and really enhance these players that are developing as they get through the through the stages of football.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's in addition to just right before they go on the field. Some of the other programs that that these folks were offering was also stuff you can do like 3 to 4 times a week for 15 minutes kind of things that just through prolonged advancement of doing those things actually can give you long-term benefits to your mind and how you're reacting, your reaction speeds and all those kind of things as well. So yes, you can do this to kind of get your mind right before the game, but also just increase your overall mental awareness and your mindfulness as an athlete, as a person, just as you go in doing some training and actually specific things. So, I know I make it part of my ritual. I think it's become, and I don't know, I think there is some benefits to it, but I do in kind of my morning routine. So I do my prayer time, I do my reading, and then I also do some actual mind games that I play on my phone. That are specifically to help your brain function at a higher level. And it's like a routine of like 5 games that I just do, and it only takes like 5 minutes to get through all these games and everything. And then they tell you how you rank. Sometimes I'm happy. Oh, I'm super smart. And then sometimes I go, oh, wow, I'm really dumb. But it just, but I just figure, like doing something for my mind is always important. And I think athletes, especially because they're at the pinnacle of their profession, and to be able to have their mind functioning at the highest level, super important. We got to see that a little bit with that quarterbacks Netflix series when you saw these quarterbacks training and some of that kind of next level training that most of us aren't seeing at our local gym wherever we go, but just some different nuances that these guys are doing to actually get to that peak performance, from nutrition to mind to body and all those kind of things.
Yeah, well, it's impressive how good these players can get, and I think that the next step, I guess, is enhancing the mind side of those things. I think all that sounds just really, really cool, and the benefits have to be there as you getting prepped and ready for the game is such a high strenuous situation that I'm sure getting whatever you need, whether it's calming or it's getting you hyped up for the game, whatever they do there with that VR set. It seems to be a very, very cool way of looking at the game of football in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know we've got some stuff to talk about with NFL, maybe even dip into a little NCAA today, but we got some stuff that we wanted to talk about what's happening out there as we're down to the 53-man rosters in the NFL. We just this week we moved everyone down to the 53-man roster. Saw some good players get cut and are out there, and we'll see if they get signed to some other teams. But a lot of shakeups this week in the NFL.
Yeah, there was also a lot of undrafted free agent dudes that I saw making 53-man rosters, which I was really impressed with. Just all across the NFL, of these big name guys that might be getting playing time early on that were undrafted free agents. It's some cool stories that I've been covering. Two in particular that we can just talk about before we get deep diving into our football.
Yeah.
Just as Ivan Pace Jr., one of my favorite guys, not Lions, Vikings, different NFC North team. Vikings picked him up as an undrafted free agent. He basically spent the entire preseason as the main play caller in the for that defense, having the what's the green little sticky thing that they got on their helmets that marks the play caller on the
Yeah.
defense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know what that's
he was
called, but
he
yeah.
was repping that the entire preseason, and I mean, for undrafted free agent, he was, I think, the highest rated linebacker in college last year.
Nice.
But just due to measurements, they all went no, this guy isn't going to be able to be a linebacker at the NFL level. Me and you talked about this a little bit earlier today about how sometimes you need to just forget about that you're drafting on potential and just realize that you're drafting a football player.
Absolutely.
And Ivan Pace Jr., he's a football player out of Cincinnati, and he may not be the biggest, strongest, fastest guy, but he knows how to play football. So I like him as well. And then speaking out of knowing football, a guy that you definitely like to cover, and that's the Ferris State, as you used to coach at Ferris State. And the D end out of there, Caleb Murphy, has been making some big splashes with the Titans.
Yeah, he had I believe, 4 sacks in the preseason. Just really has looked like he's got a high motor. Again, a guy that probably should have been drafted. I mean, he tore it up at the D2 level, but because it was D2, he was left undrafted. Look for big things out of Caleb Murphy. He's just a good football player. And Titans, actually, I read an article I was telling you about that. They also a D3 player out of Baldwin Wallace made their 53-man roster coming out of camp as well. So apparently the Titans are not afraid to dip into some lower divisions at the college level to find ball players. And I think that's always a good sign for a football team when they're not caring about like just where the guy was drafted, how he got to the organization, just putting out the best football players on the field at all times.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of football players, that the Caleb Murphy guy that we were just talking about,
Yeah.
40 total sacks in his last 2 college football seasons. It might have been Division II, but when you get 40 sacks in 2 seasons,
Yeah.
you're just a football
You're
player.
doing
I,
some
I
things.
don't care what division it is. I just want to see what it can happen at the next level. Speaking of the next level, though, we can talk a little bit AFC, as that is one of the more fun sides of the NFL, as there's a lot of really good teams, a lot of really good quarterbacks
Yeah, a lot
in
of good quarterback
particular
play.
in the NFC. Where do you see some of these teams landing? Let's start off with the NFC North, as that's got that Bengals, Ravens, Browns, and Steelers.
Well, you've got a historically great division there. You just always well coached. Obviously, we talked about, I think, last episode about how the Ravens. You got John Harbaugh's been the longest tenured, I believe, coach and with one team in the NFL currently, and just a lot of consistency there with the Ravens because of that. And they've just been a solid team throughout that entire time. And so you've got a lot of consistency, but the team with the most consistency, I think, in all of the NFL over all of the years, of course, is also in that division, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers, just known for, very over their entire history, very few coaches. Once they hire a guy, they've found their guy and they stick with them, and that's paid dividends for them by hiring right and getting the right guys. Mike Tomlin, just a great coach, and that he got that team where he did last year, with a rookie quarterback and just not really stacked in his favor. So I always never count the Steelers out. And then you got the Bengals, right? I mean, the Bengals have been playing. 2 years ago, they were in the Super Bowl. Last year, they were a couple of plays away from making it back to the Super Bowl in that game with them and the Chiefs, a very tight, highly contested game with some controversial calls in it. And so that's there. The Browns, of course, the Browns always seem to be the ones that are left out, but there's a lot of talent. I think a talented coach with Stefanski there calling the shots, and if some players rebound to what they should be, then they're a dangerous team as well from top to bottom. But I'll have to stick with the Bengals at the top of that. They just, for the last couple of years have been, right there on the cusp of winning a Super Bowl. And so I don't think I can count them out from being the number one team. But the Ravens and the Steelers right there nipping at their heels for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a very grab 'em division right there. I think that Bengals are the clear-cut favorites in that division. I think agreeing with you in that sense, but I'm going to go with a little different take as I'm feeling a little hot right now. As right now, looking at strength of schedule, as that kind
That's
of comes into
significant.
play when we're talking about who wins the division,
Yeah.
as it's not always the best team that wins the division. It's usually the team that has the mixture of the best schedule and is a really good team as well. And
Yeah.
so I'm leaning towards the Steelers. I
Okay.
like second year for Kenny Pickett.
Yep.
You got him developing that duo with him and George Pickens. You got Deontay Johnson over there as the other wide receiver that's really, really good. You got other really good players all around that team, along with a good defense, with arguably the best defender in the entire NFL with TJ Watt. I think they just have a very, very good lineup to take advantage of their seventh easiest schedule in the NFL, where the rest of that division sits around that 17 to 21 range.
Okay.
And so, a 10 teams harder schedule. So it's not nearly as good looking for the Cincinnati Bengals, who have the 21st easiest schedule. And then you got Baltimore Ravens with the 17th easiest schedule, the other two teams competing for that spot. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see who ends up taking that one. But I'll go with Steelers with the solid coaching staff.
I don't disagree. It's not as hot a take, I don't think, as maybe it sounds like. That is a good pick, and strength of schedule. It's amazing if you look at that year over year, that how important that is for teams' records, because everything out of division. So they're going to play everybody in their division twice. So that's kind of levels out amongst the division. But then what's that look like outside the division, and who are they going to have to face in that? And so that is significant. I think the Bengals make the playoffs even if they end up in second place. They're one of those teams that'll take some losses sometimes in the regular season, but come playoff time, you always just seem to lock in and be ready to make a run.
Yeah, it's always line for them. Can we keep Joe Burrow upright?
Absolutely.
And so if they can keep him upright, I have no doubt that the Bengals end up winning. But if anything gets all skewed around, I view the Steelers being that team to maybe shoot on up and steal away that AFC North title.
Nicely
But
played there.
let's quickly move to a different division. Let's talk about the AFC South with those Jags, Titans, Colts, and Texans, as I think that's also a very interesting one as well. As that's probably the worst division in the AFC.
Probably so, but there's a couple of coaches in that division that I absolutely love. Doug Peterson, I think, is just perfectly built for today's NFL. Just a great offensive mind, and he knows how to work with the players in the modern era. Like, as a former NFL player himself, he just kind of understands the culture, what it needs to be, and I think it's a perfect match with him, with a young quarterback and helping develop there. And I really like where the Jaguars are at. But the same thing I feel like with the Titans, as far as a former NFL coach, well built for today's coaching game in the Titans there. And so, but the Colts, they're going to be a fun team, but I don't think they're quite ready for prime time. You got the Texans. Man, I don't know all what it's going to take for the Texans to get into a good place, but I don't think they're ready quite yet this year as well. So I think it's going to be the Jaguars and the Titans, and I think the Jaguars come out on top of that division.
First, just before I give out my opinions on who I think's the best or not, do you think that Texans first trading away their next year's first overall pick for Will Anderson is going to end up being worth it long term? As they went kind of for the, everyone says you need your QB and you need that star-studded defensive edge rusher that can get after the quarterback. They said, I'm going to get both of them in one draft, but they had traded away some draft capital for that to happen. Do you see it working?
Usually those things don't work out. So I would I would lean towards that doesn't end up working out well for them. But if it does, they're going to look like absolute geniuses.
Oh, because it'll be such a quick turnaround, and you'll be so happy with yourself as when you have a quarterback and an edge rusher that both are running the offenses at a high level, or an offense slash defense at a high level. You're living pretty good, even if the rest of the players around them are struggling.
Yeah, and they both are
But
super
back
talented,
to
that's
my
for sure. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Oh, for sure. Completely agree. Back to AFC South, though, and who I think is going to be those really good teams in the AFC South. I obviously love the hiring for the Colts of Shane Steichen, as he's coming out of that OC job for the Eagles. I think he's going to bring in a really good dynamic for that Colts team. They already have some really good players all across the board. Big question mark on the running back position, but I think the running back position gets devalued when you have a guy as mobile as an Anthony Richardson.
Yeah.
Texans, I think, are going to be in that same situation. As I like what they're doing. They got the QB, they got the young edge rusher, they got also a young DB with I'm forgetting his name, out of LSU, that had played so good for multiple years. Even was a really good player on that LSU championship team as a freshman. But I can look him up in just a second.
Yeah.
But they're building a team that's super young, really well put together. That Texans team as a whole just looking really, really good. And so I don't want to discount how well they've been able to build that team up and become better over the last 2-3 years. But I think that those two teams are kind of just a notch below the top two teams, with those Titans and Jaguars
Yeah.
really duking it out for that number one spot. That Houston Texans cornerback, by the way, is I can't find it. Gosh.
Oh, well, we'll give you a little bit of time to figure out. Hey, I'll ask you a question while you're looking that up. When it comes to the
Yes.
Indianapolis Colts, there's a lot of rumors that have come out now about Jonathan Taylor and about the Colts trying to trade him away and some of the offers that they made. I was listening to one where I heard that they tried to do a straight up between him and Waddle for the Dolphins. But I just think the value of a wide receiver these days, there's no way that a team's going to do a trade, a straight trade for a running back for a wide receiver.
Yeah, unless I'm getting Christian McCaffrey for my number 2 wideout,
Yeah.
then no, I'm not going to be trading away a running back for a wide receiver, especially on Jalen Waddle's level, where you see him as one of those guys as being a future number 1 wide receiver for your team.
Right.
I think that that would just be an idiotic trade for them.
Yeah.
I did pull up that cornerback finally, as that cornerback that is no longer Derek Stingley Jr.
Okay.
Derek Stingley Jr. So good for LSU those last few years. And so I like how they're building that defense for the Texans. And I think they're doing it the right way, as they have a defensive-minded head coach. And I think building young defensively is the way you build as a defensive head coach, and then you bring the vets onto the offensive side of football. I think that's the way you build a quick rebuild on a team like the Texans.
Yeah.
But back to Titans, Jags, as I want to talk a lot more about those guys. As Titans, Jags are definitely going to be some of my more interesting teams, I think, just coming into the year. As Titans struggled last year, they didn't have a number 1 wide receiver. You saw the value of having a number 1 wide receiver with those Titans, as they were so dominant with A.J. Brown, so lackluster without A.J. Brown. I think getting DeAndre Hopkins is going to really change how that team looks. I also think they made some really nice signings on the defensive end for them, along with some of my favorite, last minute keeps on their 50-man roster, talking about the Caleb Murphy, as I think he might get some playing time by the end of the year as an edge rusher.
Yeah, for sure.
Then Jaguars, I think, you get one of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to start getting himself into the argument with the Joe Burrows, Josh Allens of the world, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts. I think he's going to put himself into that category of a quarterback, just some of the best in the NFL to do it. And I think that's going to boost that team up to a whole new notch. I have Jaguars taking the win in that AFC South, but I do think the Titans make it close.
Well, I'll tell you what, the reports I'm hearing about Calvin Ridley there with the Jags, I mean, just looking absolutely fantastic. I wouldn't be surprised to see, 30 touchdowns. What did he have last year? Like 20, 25, I think, touchdowns, for Lawrence last year. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets more into that 30 touchdown range this season, as he just takes that next progression steps. And he's got Calvin Ridley to lean on a little bit that he didn't have last year. So
Oh yeah, even if he doesn't have maybe that true blue number one guy, if Calvin Ridley hasn't hit that point yet, he still has such an onslaught of receiving talent that it's going to be able to get the job done.
absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about AFC East, as those teams are going to be an interesting one. This is another one that I'll have a little bit more of a hot take in, as listed as the general consensus is Bills at number one spot, Jets at number two, Dolphins at number three, and the Patriots at the last spot. I will not argue with you that the Patriots are going to be at the bottom of that division, as I think everyone can agree with that as of right now, unless something changes drastically, that's how that looks. But my number three team is actually going to be the Buffalo Bills. They've
Mm.
been my big fade team of the year, as I've been Buffalo Bills, getting away from them. Don't want to touch any Buffalo Bills player for my fantasy team. I don't want anything to do with Buffalo Bills at all, just because I don't trust the offensive system. I don't like that they don't have a great offensive line or a run game. They have issues with that number one wide receiver. And then when you go past that number one wide receiver, you got Gabe Davis, but there's not a lot of receiving talent on that team either. And so that's one of those teams that I have really dropping off this next year. As then I have Jets at my number two team, as they're getting all accustomed to the Aaron Rodgers show, as well as having all the young talent. I do see them dropping a few games with just being young, learning how to play with one another. But I do see them being one of the best teams within that AFC East. And then my number one team is going to be the Dolphins. I love the Dolphins. I love McDaniels, as I think he is just a fantastic coach. And I think you get a full season of healthy Tua Tagovailoa, and you are going to see them at that number one spot.
I like the pick. I'll tell you what, we're getting so much attention on the AFC East right now because of Hard Knocks, Aaron Rodgers, all the things happening over there. They're giving us a big sales job. I look at the new Aaron Rodgers and just how well he plays nice in the sandbox with others and all that kind of stuff. And it is an exciting story. It's fun. It's New York, so it's a big media market. So those are always, like the bigger story, right? When you're in one of those towns that's where the media is at. So I think that's super fun. I agree with you on the Bills, right? That boy, like things don't look good. Like the reports you hear coming out, like what you saw as the season progressed last year. And I agree with you as well on the Dolphins. Like, yeah, young team, just, love the coach, love what's happening there. Tua scares me with the injury. I really am rooting for him and hope that he's got a season injury free and that we get to see the best version of Tua and that he stays upright. I just don't want to see any more of those hits. And I don't have a lot of belief in that Patriots, just where they're at, especially from an offense. I always trust their defense. Bill Belichick's always going to have that defense playing, good football that's going to make, especially young quarterbacks cringe before they walk into the stadium that day. But from an offensive standpoint, I don't know. I just not a believer in what's going to happen on the offensive side of the balls, but it should be better. I don't think Matt Patricia is at the helm anymore on the offensive side, and that's always a good thing for a team. So not to be too harsh on Matt, super smart guy. I don't think he's an offensive mind though, and it's been a rough stretch since the Lions back to the Patriots. So where am I going to
Yeah.
go?
Now,
This is a tough pick for me because I'm not 100% sure. I'm going to say the Bills don't fully drop out of that number one spot, but we do see decline there. And then between the Jets and the Dolphins, I'm torn on what's going to happen there. I'm going to go Dolphins 2, Jets 3, which that's as hot of a take as I'm getting here in this, and the Patriots in that last spot there.
yeah, I think that's a good one. I think if I had to guess, there might be a team below the Patriots, as the Patriots are almost guaranteed to get a certain amount of wins to get them out of the top 10 picks in the draft.
Correct.
And so, they may end up as the number 3 spot, as one of those teams, Dolphins, Jets, or Bills. They might lose enough games where they go, okay, our season's over. We're going to tank and we're going to lose, and we'll end up in the last spot.
Right. Well, I think if
But
it goes
as
bad for the Jets, it's going to go really bad because I think it's got to work, right? Like they've pushed all the
absolutely.
chips to the center of the table.
I completely agree. Now let's move on to the most talented division, as the AFC West has talent all across the board, but we're kind of confident on who's going to end up winning this division, as it is the constant domination of the Chiefs.
Yeah, you've got the best coach, you got the best quarterback. You just assume that that's gonna work out well for you, and so yeah, I think the Chiefs win. But who's number two does become a lot more interesting.
Oh, completely agree with that. As you got then Chargers, Broncos, Raiders there. I think that people are going to underrate the Raiders 100%, as I think people don't think of Jimmy Garoppolo as a really good quarterback. But in the regular season, I love Jimmy Garoppolo as a quarterback. Now, do I want him to be competing for me for a Super Bowl? But if I'm looking to win 10 games in a season, I love a Jimmy Garoppolo doing play action with Josh Jacobs and tossing it out to Devontae Adams. Like, I think it looks good for that Raiders team, more so than a lot of people expect.
Yeah, well, Jimmy Garoppolo, if he's upright for 10 games, I think they might win 10 games. The Jimmy Garoppolo, my only issue with Jimmy is he available, you know? And that's always been the challenge for him since he's been with the 49ers. But we'll see. I hopefully maybe the Vegas, the dry heat over there in Vegas will do wonders, keep him upright. Maybe it's just, you know, the right situation, the right spot for him. And all of a sudden he's able to stay healthy. But I love what's happened with the Chargers. New offensive coordinator. You got Kellen Moore coming over there. They've really needed that insurgence into their offense with some fresh ideas in mind. And I think the challenge is going to be, it's kind of like I just was talking about with the Jets. If it starts to go bad, it may go really bad for the Chargers because they expect for good things to happen. Everyone's talking about all the talent that's on that team, and all of a sudden that coach gets on a hot seat if they lose some games early on, and then you start pressing and you start doing some stuff that doesn't win you football games, and then that starts to go the wrong direction because you got a really, just rock solid coach with the Denver Broncos sitting there with, a player that while he was with the Seahawks was one of the best in the game, Russell Wilson, and can he rebound now that he's with Sean Payton in Denver? So that those two is really where the conversation gets interesting for me.
Oh, as those are the two teams with maybe some of the highest floors and the lowest floors and the highest ceilings within the entire NFL. If
Yes.
you're talking about even NFC and AFC included, both Chargers and Broncos, I could see them winning 13 games. I could also see them only winning 8 games.
Right.
And so you go like, there's a big variation of what these teams could do and where they end up in this upcoming season. And that's where you get really, really interesting. I like the Chargers a lot. I think they're just one of those really well-built team. I like Justin Herbert. I think them adding another receiving talent to that roster, as Keenan Allen is a guy that is a very good wide receiver, but he's one of those guys that's getting up there in age. And so you like having him as that veteran red zone presence, getting you open in those nice short yardage. But he can't be a consistent guy that's going to be bringing in double coverage for you. Getting that guy out of LSU is going to be a huge add for them. Obviously, they still have Mike Williams on that team as well as a wide receiver. So they got the offensive weapons, including Austin Eckler. Defensively, they have the names to go out there and be a star-studded defense, but it didn't seem like they could ever put it together defensively last year. And
Right.
so I'm going to be curious to see if they can put together a defense that can actually stop some teams, as they were not able to stop anybody, even though they had guys that were able to get after the quarterback, guys that were shut down cornerbacks on other teams. None of it seemed to all come together like we were expecting for that Chargers team.
Absolutely. And I agree with you on that. I think the caveat is watch if if the Chargers lose 3-4 games early on in the season, let's say in the first 5-6 games, if somehow they drop some early games, then just watch them kind of fold. I just think that that's a team that could actually go the wrong direction really quickly. So my prediction would be that they'd be the second place team in that division. But I also am going to watch early, and I'm going to be jumping off the bandwagon super fast if they drop some early, because I don't think they're one of those teams that kind of can sustain, some bad losses early and then come back and do some great things later in the season. I think the opposite with the Broncos. You've got Sean Payton. He's not going to be rattled if they lose some games early. He's got a system. He knows what he does. They're not getting rid of this guy. He's a coaching legend. He's going to be there, I think, for a while. And, you're going to see the Broncos improve, I think, as the season goes on. And he's able to just, get what he does entrenched into the whole program. The longer he's there, the better they'll get. So, but I'll go Chargers. So I'm going Chiefs, Chargers, Broncos, then the Raiders. But I could see the Raiders getting into that mix of, third, maybe even second if things really go well with Jimmy Garoppolo. He's able to stay healthy. And I could see Chargers really drop off if things go bad early in the season.
Oh, completely agree. I think both teams are going to be interesting coming into the season, seeing how it all plays out. And that's not to say that if these teams work out, the Chargers and the Broncos, both of them, they have the opportunity to challenge the Chiefs for that number one spot. But that's totally to be seen. That could happen this season, but I ain't going to predict it because the Chiefs have just been so dominant over the last just so many years.
Yeah, I feel like you're just going for clickbait or something if you're going to predict the Chiefs aren't going to win that division.
Oh, absolutely. Now we can talk. Do you want to talk AFC QBs and just talk about what we're thinking about those guys?
Yeah, it sounds like fun. I think the AFC is definitely loaded compared to the NFC with super talented quarterbacks.
Yeah, well, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the AFC starting quarterbacks making the NFL top 100 list over this past year. And so that's just a testament to those guys. And that's not including guys like Russell Wilson, Jimmy Garoppolo, Mac Jones, Ryan Tannehill, all guys that at some point I consider could have been in that top 100, bottom half maybe, or, some of them getting up there in the top half of that top 100.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting about, like we were talking about this before we went on air, and kind of how the top 100 is voted on by NFL players, and players like athletes, right? And they kind of lean towards the top athletes. But in reality, because of the importance of the position of quarterback in how that really dictates, besides a head coach, maybe the most of anybody on a football team in wins and losses, that you could even argue that, if you're a top 16 quarterback in the NFL, like, you probably should be in this top 100 just because of the importance you play on a football team. And with the AFC kind of being really heavy on some good quarterbacks, that 7 might even be light. And where they fell within that top 100 may have been a little bit light as well. As you pointed out, some of these guys are a little low in that 100 and had really nice seasons last year.
Oh, absolutely. So we'll just go over some of them. Well, I'll get your underrated or overrated on it. Starting off with the Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson. He ended up being in the NFL top 100, even though he was injured for the entire season. You can make your opinion on whether that should be judged on it or not. But he landed at the number 72 spot in the top 100.
He's one of those guys that on any given play, he can be the most dynamic player in the history of the NFL at any moment. But he also, availability has to play a factor in this. And if I'm going to say that availability is playing a factor, and he probably doesn't even make my top 100. But if I'm talking about him as an actual player, then yeah, for sure he's in the top 100. Probably he should be way higher than 72, to be honest with you, if it's just purely based on what he can do when he's available to play. Now, we're still yet to see with his new offensive coordinator, does that new system work? I'm not 100% sure that's going to be the most effective thing, what they've gone to as far as an offensive system. But he's a dynamic enough player. I'm in, grab the popcorn. I'm going to watch.
Yeah, and we live in an age where you got to out run and gun Patrick Mahomes.
Right.
Lamar Jackson is one of the few quarterbacks in the NFL that can keep up with a Patrick Mahomes when you talk about scoring and putting up yardage and points on an NFL football field.
For sure.
So I go right now probably for the mass media. I say he's an underrated guy. I think over the span of his career, like during his MVP season, he got into the realm of overrated. But I think now that he's injured all the time, you can't build around Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is the most dynamic QB in the NFL right now when healthy. And so I still think, underrated in that aspect.
Yeah, I can see that.
Next up, Buffalo Bills Josh Allen. He ranked at the number 8 in the NFL Top 100. Overrated or underrated?
I think probably slightly overrated, although again, a super talented guy, but him minus Dayball has really looked like on a trajectory downward. And so I'm not saying he's not one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. He obviously is super talented. When he's running with the football too, he can be dynamic with his legs, kind of almost a power back, out there. And so super talented, but I don't know if 8th in the NFL overall of all the players, like that's where I would rank him. So maybe slightly overrated.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about a guy that is a team, Josh Allen is everything to the Buffalo Bills. And so, like Lamar Jackson, it gets hard to rank him because I think sometimes gets misused within the system that he's in because of the mass amount of talent that they have. And so they get into situations where they are unopportunistic for what I consider to be a starting quarterback in the NFL just because of injuries and getting too many hits on your body. I think him and Lamar get kind of grouped into the same category for me in that aspect of just such high talent levels, but I just don't know how long within their systems they can last. Yeah, so I agree with you. Just slightly overrated, but I do think he's one of those guys that is just so talented.
For sure.
Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Burrow. He ranked at the number 6 spot in the NFL top 100.
I'd have to look at who the other 5 ahead of him were, but it seems about right for me. Joe Burrow at that 6th spot. I mean, he's right in that top 2-3 quarterbacks in the league. Again, I talk about the importance of the position. He's a few plays away from being in a second straight Super Bowl. I love the way he plays. He's not the statistical darling, that you're going to always love the stats that show up, but he's one of those guys that somehow he always ends up on the winning side of things, and it doesn't matter which level, high school, college, at the NFL. He just comes out with the wins. He doesn't always do it the prettiest, but you feel good when he's on the field if you're a Bengals fan and you like him out there, throwing the football for sure.
Yeah, I think he'll be a perennial underrated guy forever, just like because he doesn't have these crazy highlight plays. He's not going to put up these insane stats. You're going to get the highlight film of Justin Herbert is going to be significantly more impressive than the highlight film from Joe Burrow. But then when you go and check the record and how many wins to losses they have, you go and look at big games, big moments, the last drive of the game, who's more successful. Joe Burrow seems to succeed in all those categories. And so I think he's one of those guys that's underrated. I think a lot of people do value him properly. Obviously, he's the number 6 player in the entirety of the NFL, according to the players and coaches. But I think that he's still underrated, as I think he's the second best quarterback in the NFL, which is the most valuable position in the NFL.
Definitely underrated when it comes to his fashion game. That he's right up there with Cam Newton, for the fashion game. So.
Absolutely. Okay, some guys that we probably have a little bit less to talk about. Cleveland Browns, Deshaun Watson. I think he's overrated. Hasn't shown us anything since being out of the NFL that he's any bit of the player he once was. Yeah. And so overrated player, as everyone expects him to somehow bloom back into the player he was at one point.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of that. Like all of a sudden this year, he's going to be right back to where he was. You know what? He may. We'll see. But as of right now, he was not impressive at all last year.
Okay, Broncos, Russell Wilson. I'm going to go with that he is underrated right now. Everyone is just ragging on my guy Russell Wilson. Dude's just straight positivity. He was a great player for the Seattle Seahawks for so long, and I see them getting the most out of him once again this year with all the weapons and changes in coaching.
I'm rooting for Russell. I really am rooting that it's a better season this year. Yeah, I've been a Russell Wilson fan, and thought even at his peak he was underrated as a player throughout the entire. Never won an MVP. I think he definitely should have been in some of those conversations on some of those years for sure. And I think he's underrated, definitely.
Yeah, I completely agree. Houston Texans, CJ Stroud, he's a rookie. He can't be rated properly. Indianapolis Colts, Anthony Richardson, another rookie, can't be rated properly, as we have no clue what they're going to be as the NFL players, as rookies are impossible to grade.
Correct.
Next up, though, a guy that we've gotten now 2 years of, Trevor Lawrence. He was ranked at the 96th spot in the NFL Top 100 playing for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
I'm definitely going underrated on him, although I'm seeing a lot of people talk about it all depends on the pundit, right? I mean, some people are already talking about him in the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, possibly overrated with those folks. I hear a lot of other ones they're talking about him in the top 10. I think maybe properly rated. He's really a good young talent. Again, talk about another guy. Been one of the top rated quarterbacks since, I don't know, when he was in 8th grade. I mean, he's just a prodigy, probably the best quarterback prospect to come in the NFL since Andrew Luck. I mean, and I know Andrew Luck's career was cut short, but great quarterback all the way through like that as well. And so, anyways, the look with I just really like him paired up with Doug Peterson. I know I said that earlier in the broadcast, and I'm gonna say underrated in general, with a few people maybe overrated, but in general, I think he's underrated.
I'll go with this is going to be one of my few just cop out answers, properly rated.
Okay.
As of right now.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to go with. He's somewhere in those top quarterbacks. We've only seen one good year of him with Doug Peterson. We've seen a ton of quarterbacks show really good 1 years.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to hold back as I expect him to repeat it once again, as he's been a successful quarterback all the way through, like you were talking about. But I'll hold my just overreaction for it and say I need another year before I say he's 100% in that solidified going to be a top quarterback in the next 10 years of the NFL.
How about the hair game? Are you ranking him overrated or underrated on the hair?
Ooh, overrated hair, to be honest. I'm a big curls guy. Troy Polamalu, my guy, absolutely. And so with his straight hair, just don't like it nearly as much as I like a good curly long hair action.
Okay, I'll take it. I'll take it.
Is a little more in-depth answer than you probably expected. But next up, Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes. This is a guy that I think is properly rated.
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes, there's no other way to rank him other than the best quarterback in the NFL. I think the only time he gets overrated is when people already rank him as the number 1 quarterback in the history of the NFL. And granted, he's probably on that pace, but let's just let him actually play out his career. And right now, definitely the best quarterback in the NFL.
Oh, absolutely. That's all we can really say about that. Las Vegas Raiders, Jimmy Garoppolo. My opinion, I think is an underrated guy. I think obviously availability causes a huge issue with him. He's also a guy that I've heard isn't the easiest to get along with in the locker room for teams, especially once he starts to get disgruntled. And so I think that I like Jimmy Garoppolo as a player when he's on the field, being that point guard of the offense, just dishing it out to all of his athletes. But, there's a few other things that just bring me back on him. So just slightly underrated for me and Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, probably underrated when he's healthy for sure. But I don't know what his rating is when he's not healthy. It's just he's not existent. He's not available. And so I'm just a huge guy of, quarterbacks or any player, if you're available, you're more valuable to me. And so if I've got a great talented guy, but he's never available, he's not the talent because I can't utilize it when he's in when he's doing PT, he's not playing football.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, how about the Los Angeles Chargers, Justin Herbert? He landed at the number 32 spot in the NFL Top 100.
Probably with the amount of change that he's had in the coaching staff, that he's had a defensive minded head coach, that all the things he's had to deal with since he's been at the Chargers, I'm going to say underrated. I think he's actually a really, really good quarterback. And you don't hear a lot of him being ranked in like that top 5, like we'll say, of quarterbacks. But I think he probably is. And especially when you talk about, system matters so much to quarterbacks, coaches matter so much to quarterback play. And I think this guy's done it, had really successful play without that. It hasn't always shown up in the win column as a team, but he's played very well in a lot of chaos.
Yeah, I completely agree. Justin Herbert, he is one of those guys that plays just fantastic through and through. I do think that it does come down as he's going to be one of those guys that he could get caught up in the Phillip Rivers spot
Right.
of the NFL. Phillip Rivers, Chargers QB as well. First round exit guy, just known for being just a guy that would be good enough to make the playoffs and then would lose, be barely just on the brink of making the wild card, some years, other years not. And that seems to be the trajectory so far that Justin Herbert has been following as well, is that he's going to put up these great statistics, but then never be able to win those games. And so I think there's a little bit of underrated, a little bit of overrated when it comes to him because of those statistics. And I love to see guys winning over seeing great statistics, in my opinion.
For sure.
That's why I love a good Joe Burrow so much.
Yeah.
And I'm not as high on like a Josh Allen kind of player. But I do think that when playing Justin Herbert and when everything's working around him, he's so good. I just have to see him around a team that's actually a winning team. Environment. Next up, Miami Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa. Oh, you guys say?
Oh, I was just gonna say about that would be a long history of the Chargers if he remains in that line, because even Dan Fouts before Phillip Rivers, right? Like back in the air carry-out. Just you talk about just a great quarterback on a losing franchise. Yeah. So
on a team that just can't seem to get out of the funk. Right? I mean, it's like the worst spot to be at in the NFL is to just be being carried by a quarterback to 8 wins.
Yeah, exactly. The difference is you could be a Lions quarterback and they're usually been career killers, but Chargers haven't killed their quarterbacks at least. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the benefit. They, I think that they're still standing upright.
Right.
Well, Justin Herbert, great quarterback, and I don't know whether to say he's underrated or overrated, but I think it's definitely one of those things that's going to be a heavy topic of discussion over the next 2 years. Next up, Miami Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa. He's going to be one of those guys that are underrated in my book. He's one of those guys, he gets the ball out of his hands quickly. He maybe doesn't have that cannon of an arm, but he throws a very accurate ball all the way from deep, middle to a short game of the field. Being accurate at all 3 levels is something that I really look at for a QB, especially a guy that doesn't have the mobility that some of these other guys has. You want to look for a guy that can just get it to athletes. And let me tell you, he's got some of the best athletes in the business. And so I say Tua Tagovailoa underrated, as he may be one of the best statistical passing QBs this upcoming season.
Absolutely. I think he's underrated as well. I will say this, that I don't know how you rank this, but in the mother category, like I feel like I'm this guy's mother. Like I'm so worried about him every time he goes out on the field. I'm concerned about his well-being. Like I just have this, it's almost like a kid. Like you're like, oh, be careful when you go out there. There's bullies out there. They might hit you really hard. Just be safe.
It's a huge worry because I mean everyone saw that hit that happened from Tua Tagovailoa, and just watching his body collapse. It's a hard thing to watch, and so seeing him go back on the field, you're like, are you sure you're supposed to do this? But obviously he has such a love for football, and so I'm excited to see what he can do with that team and just how dynamic that offense is. I know that he's the kind of player that's perfectly fit for that Shanahan style offense of just being a point guard and getting it out super quick.
Absolutely. Well, kind of the next Alabama quarterback after Tua is Mac Jones sitting over there with the Patriots. What do you think about Mac?
Oh, it's just one of those things where he gets stuck into a really bad situation as his head coach has convinced himself that he doesn't need to draft wide receivers in a league that's led by wide receivers. And so I like it like when you have Tom Brady, your coaching life becomes a lot easier. Your
Mhm.
drafting life, you hit a lot more on your draft picks than when you do when you don't have Tom Brady. And I think Mac Jones is kind of in a situation where he's being a quarterback for a team that doesn't understand how to build around the current NFL systems, doesn't know how to build around how the current NFL is structured. And so I think it's more New England Patriots that I'm down on than Mac Jones that I'm down on.
Yeah.
And so I'll say that Mac Jones is just properly rated, as I don't want to say he's bad or good.
Yeah, I would say he's properly rated as well. Kind of same thing. Well, they just got into when they had a transcendent player with Tom Brady that just could make a bad receiving core look like a good receiving core, and kind of Belichick kind of created a system around being able to move all the talent to the defensive side of the ball and kind of shift talent where he needed it for the way he coached, because Tom Brady was just who Tom Brady was. And I don't think Mac Jones could be, can be in that as that player. You put Mac Jones as, the 49ers quarterback, or some other teams where all of a sudden we have a very different thought about Mac Jones and who he is as a player.
Oh, completely agree. Next up, New York Jets. Aaron Rodgers landed at the 51 spot in the NFL Top 100. I think that this is one of those spots that it could go either way. I don't know if he's underrated or overrated heading into this season. I think that obviously he's put together so many years. I mean, you talk about 4 MVPs in a Super Bowl career already. Like he's already a Hall of Fame guy.
Right.
Playing in this New York Jets team. But I do think that this may be the most talented roster he's had over the last 5 years, and so I could see him really booming and becoming one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL this year. And so that's a real question. You could go underrated or overrated. It's just a matter on how this whole team ends up working out.
Yeah, for 100. Well, like you said, he's an all time great. He's almost been put into an impossible situation, because I think with the situation being there, if he doesn't win a Super Bowl, it's like it was a down year, for him this year. And I think that's really high expectations for this Jets team. It's not like they won it last year or they've won it anytime soon. I believe it was Joe Namath who was the quarterback last time they won a Super Bowl. So, it's been a long time since they've won that Super Bowl. So I'd say that he's probably overrated, but just because of the expectations that are there for him. He's one of the all-time greats. He's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. Like, so I don't, whatever that is,
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one for sure when it comes down to the New York Jets. Pittsburgh Steelers with Kenny Pickett. What's your thoughts on him? It's only 1 year of being able to tell what Kenny Pickett is, but I do think that a lot of people underrate his ability, as I think he gets kind of labeled as a pocket passer, but the dude is an athlete. He can move. He has great movement skills and doesn't get credited for those movement skills. I think kind of similar to how Daniel Jones in the early portions of his career didn't get registered as a great mover until he just started breaking off run after run. And people were like, oh, Daniel Jones can actually run the football. I think Kenny Pickett's one of those guys that's going to prove within this Steelers offense over the next few years. He's going to show off a little bit more of that mobility, that athleticism, and I think he's going to prove that he's better than what everyone views him right now.
Well, everyone's viewing him at the bottom of the league as a starting quarterback. I feel like that's kind of where he's slotted as of right now. And so it's hard to say he's overrated, you know, and if you're saying that, you'd think he should be a backup, I think, at that point. I do see a lot of similarities between him and his backup, Mitch Trubisky. I think, you know, Mitch was probably an underrated quarterback in what he was able to do just because he was so overrated when he got drafted. And so, you know, where Mitch actually was somewhere in the middle, I think Kenny is getting a little bit of that as well, you know, like where, okay, maybe he's not, you know, a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, but I think, you know, in that Steelers just kind of consistent system, if he can get the ball out quickly and when he can't, he can use his legs to do some positive things. I think Kenny Pickett could end up being better than what he's viewed as of right now.
Completely agree. A guy that can be kind of viewed as an older version of that style of quarterback is actually playing for the Tennessee Titans, Ryan Tannehill. I think Ryan Tannehill is one of those guys that was overrated probably 2 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
but has now since then become an underrated quarterback. As I love a veteran that's played a lot of football, understands his system really, really well. He didn't have any wide receivers last year, and I expect that to be a big change for his production this upcoming season.
Yeah, I think he's probably slightly underrated right at this point. Yeah, he lost AJ Brown. That was a tough loss. You can see what that does for a team. Look what he did for the Eagles and helping taking that team to the Super Bowl. And so expect Ryan Tannehill to have a little bit of a bounce back year, in my opinion, and him to be looked at as probably being underrated at the current moment.
For sure, for sure. Well, definitely fun talking about these AFC quarterbacks. A lot of talent over there in the quarterback position when it comes down to that AFC.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I saw that you had developed the top five in the college football. Always interesting college football coming into the season. So many teams like the NFL, yeah, seem to have a better, like more consistent track record. Like if a team's ranked as one of the best teams, usually they're going to probably be one of the best teams in the NFL. In college football, sometimes you have wild swings of where teams can fall, and it seems like this new kind of where things are going, just with the NCAA and you know the NIL, some different stuff that's been changing with the portal and all those kind of things. That maybe there's some shakeups happening, and the things that we've been seeing for the past 10, 15 years may not be the things that are happening today. But I'm interested to hear about your NCAA Division I college football top five picks.
Yeah, well, I think that you did mention a lot of switch arounds and everything like that, but I'm going to start with the number one team because that's the most boring team because everyone's going to have the same number one team, even though there's a lot of shakeups probably past that number one team of who you think is the number two team.
Right.
Number one team is Georgia. I
Yeah.
mean, you can't
Can
choose
they
anyone
three-peat?
else than Georgia.
Yeah.
They lost a lot of really good talent this past year, but they look reloaded. There's rumors coming out from training camp and early fall camp that they may be even deeper and have a even more extensive. Just like when you talk about guys from your backup to your third string being excellent football players, they say they're deeper this year than they were last year, and so like that's just a statement in itself, as that team has been super deep over the last 2 years, just having NFL talent being pumped out of there. I think Stetson Bennett is one of those guys that is a quarterback, but never once did I ever think that that Georgia team was a QB reliant team.
Mm-hmm.
And so losing Stetson Bennett is not a big deal to me. They're a run first defense team. And so I don't worry about loss of a QB. They're just going to reload that position and get it back up. So I think that's that's my team that's just going to stay at the number one spot.
It's hard to argue with that. Can they three-peat? I don't know. That I feel like nipping at their heels. I think you might be in the same category of this. Is the best team that Jim Harbaugh maybe has ever had, and can they compete with Georgia? I'm not sure, but I've got that University of Michigan at number 2. I think producer Zach he's a huge Rice Owls fan, and I think he's maybe a little disturbed that we're not talking about Rice right now.
Rice. So yeah, I know. I'm always watching out for those Rice Owls. But the Michigan Wolverines are just so good. Best backfield in the entire nation with the Donovan Edwards alongside Blake Corum. I think those two guys are just so dynamic coming out of the backfield. Jim Harbaugh loves to run the football, and he's got a line that is able to do that, create lanes for those talented guys to burst out and get those big chunk plays. I think then you go even further into that, as that's just a great setup in general for a Michigan dominating team. You get the best quarterback that he's had since being a coach at
For sure.
Michigan, as he finally has a young 5-star that has been able to take over the number one QB spot at an early age. JJ McCarthy is that guy that I think could be a first round quarterback taken in the NFL in just a few years from now. And I think he could be a guy that could compete for maybe even a Heisman Trophy in the next coming years.
Yeah, absolutely. No, look for, I think, Michigan to get back into that playoffs. And the hot take about that is if Michigan gets back in those playoffs, especially if they win a national championship, look for Jim Harbaugh to be coaching the NFL in 2024.
Oh yeah, I mean, even if he doesn't go to the NFL, the whole thought process behind Jim Harbaugh completely changes as soon as he wins a national championship title. He gets put up there with the Nick Sabans, Urban Meyers, Dabo Sweeneys of the world, of just great collegiate coaches of all time, kind of thing,
Absolutely.
which would be really impressive. But number 3 on my top 5 collegiate teams is Ohio State. Now, might be the most dangerous team in the entire state when it comes to offensive firepower. Marvin Harris Jr. is unguardable. He is an unguardable weapon for those Ohio State Buckeyes. You got Emeka Egbuka. You got other great weapons out there for those Ohio State. I don't care that they're replacing replacing C.J. Stroud. They got Kyle McCord, a 5-star guy that's going to be hopping right into that spot and taking over and launching the ball all across the field. I don't think Ryan Day is going to slow down at all for that team, and I think it's going to be a really fun game to watch when Ohio State and Michigan line up against each other.
Yeah, I think they're always stacked with 5-star talent, and they're really built to beat everybody else in the country other than Michigan. Like, I think Michigan's built to beat Ohio State. Michigan can come up short in the playoffs and still beat Ohio State. And then Ohio State, well, we saw it last year, is a bad field goal kick away from winning the national championship. Well, potentially winning it if they would have beat Georgia. And so Ohio State, dangerous, dangerous team. If Michigan can get another win against them, I think the challenge is going to be the heat in Columbus on, you better beat Michigan, and you better beat them soon, because they do not like losing to that team up north.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's going to be interesting to see. Sticking with the Big Ten, though, going through my top 5, as number 4, I have Penn State. This is one of my favorite teams in the entire NCAA. I just really like the way they're constructed. They had a 4-year starter at the QB that graduated this past year. They got him replacing with a 6'4", I think 255-pound guy
Wow.
that can rush the football. He's multidimensional when it comes to being at the QB, and just an athlete. And athletes at the QB position, especially at the college level, is just a really dominant combo. You got probably the second best running back duo in NCAA over there, as they had, I think, He's 17 touchdowns for that running back last year, setting the Penn State school record for rushing touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken, and then was also added to the list of 1,000-yard rushers of that really legendary list that Penn State has of running backs. And so they just have a really good running attack. They got a good defense that has a ton of guys who have played collegiate football already years prior. They're just one of those teams that I see really booming this upcoming year.
Well, if they listen to the podcast, I know a couple of my good friends are going to be super happy. John Gilmore of Penn State fame, of course, also Super Bowl champion with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jamel Felder, big Penn State guys. They're going to love that you're going to have. They might think you went low with them at number 4 in the country. I think it's probably a little high. I would have had them more in my, if we're doing top 5, in my honorable mentions. But I do think they're a very tough football team, very good, and could end up there for sure in that top 4 into the playoffs by the end of the season, depending on how that whole Big Ten shakes out. And those 3 teams, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, I feel like that's going to be a brawl between the 3 of those teams for sure.
Yeah, that running back, Nicholas Singleton, had 12 rushing touchdowns, setting the freshman program record.
Wow.
And had 1,061 rushing yards
That's impressive.
for the Nittany Lions, being the 16th Nittany Lion to rush for over 1,000 yards. So I like that as a back. And then you also got Katron Allen, who is a very, very good running back as well. He had 867 yards rushing behind his freshman teammate Singleton last year. So really good duo right there for the Penn State Nittany Lions. I'm excited to see how they can end up playing. And at the number 5 spot for me, I got LSU. LSU is just one of those teams, has one of my favorite coaches over there, as well as a guy who's played a lot of college football at the quarterback spot, transferred out of Alabama. Now he's now he's playing for this team as they got I'm blanking on his name. Give me one second as I pull up their roster. But I think their team is going to be looking really, really good.
Yeah, I think LSU is primed and ready as well. I'd probably move them up into that 4 slot that you had, where you had Penn State. They're very strong team. Brian Kelly, great football coach, 2nd year there in the program now, able to get that thing really up and rolling. He's won at every level, everywhere he's been. So big fan of him as a coach. And LSU always loaded with 5-star talent. So they've got players everywhere, and they're going to just always compete at the top level for sure. And so I like Penn State, but I like LSU probably just a little bit better in that 4th slot. And I also just think because the Big Ten's got all 3 of those guys really rolling with Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, even if they are, one of those top level teams, one of those Big Ten teams is going to slide a little bit just because of having to face the other ones. They all are on the same side of the conference. They all have to face each other. So that's a tough one. But same could be said with, you also got Alabama, right there with, they're on the same side with LSU, but they're not on the same side with Georgia. So, that's one of the differences between the way the FCC shakes out versus the Big Ten, where all 3 of those guys are sitting on the one side. Well, LSU and Alabama are sitting on the same side, though. And so that should be a brawl, as well as, of course, we know Nick Saban, Alabama, always loaded with 5-star talent and lots of good football play. I mean, they were the dominant team until Georgia the last 3 years has just kind of really taken back over, college football.
Yeah, I mean, Alabama, I think, is one of those teams that I have them in my honorable mention list because of just how good they've been over the last few years. But opposite of what I talked about Georgia, and the reason why they're going to sustain dominance, and the reason is because they just build up that defense. They have a run-based attack. That's why Alabama was so good for so many years, I thought, was because they could just replenish that running backs, really build up a really good defense, and just live off of that. And even when you had bad outside of that, you at least had that to lean on. And Alabama, for the first time in all the years that I had been watching Alabama since they started this long string of dominance, they were completely quarterback dependent last year. Bryce Young not on that team, they don't win any games. They are a horrible team, I think, without Bryce Young. They relied on him so heavily, and whenever I watch a team, even you watch Dabo for Clemson, as he struggled as Trevor Lawrence left, I think that Alabama is going to struggle as Bryce Young leaves. And so I see them dropping out of that. I may even see them drop out of the top 10
Oh,
teams
wow.
in the nation. That's how big of a drop off I see, as how reliant they were on the quarterback just this past season.
Yeah, that's interesting. It is a change. Alabama's going through a rebirth, like having to figure out this news, what's happening in the NCAA with the NIL, with the portal. Some other coaches seeming to just kind of flourish more in that environment than Nick Saban. Nick Saban kind of complaining about, just how it's all goes. And I know he's got a war chest in the NIL, and I know that Alabama's got everything that they need to win. So I don't doubt he's a good coach. It's a good program. They're going to stay at the top of the football universe, but I don't think they're going to be quite what they've been. And you've already seen signs of that slide. And like you said, Bryce Young, we'll see. But it looked like he kind of held them in for a few years. But I'll tell you, a coach that makes quarterbacks look good, and he's got a good one at the helm as well, as I know in your honorable mentions, you also have USC.
Yeah, I mean, Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley is a match made in heaven. You mix in one of the most creative offensive play designers with one of the most creative quarterbacks in the college game, and you get something really, really special. I don't think that they got the defense to be able to be in this top 5, but I want to put them in the honorable mention the same way I think that the Chiefs are the best team in the NFL, is because can they just get into shootouts with these teams and still get the wins, because you got Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams there paired up with each other to just put up insane amount of
And I
points.
think it's possible in the Pac-12 to maybe get away with that as well, and kind of come in the back door into that playoff, just because you're in a little bit easier conference where maybe you can rely on the offense to get you through those spots, but maybe it doesn't work out quite as well once you get to the playoff. Although they're going to make it exciting no matter where they're at. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that defense last year couldn't tackle a paper bag. So hopefully we could see that USC defense improve a little bit from the previous year. My other honorable mention was Clemson, as I think they are finally starting to get out of the funk of the relying on Trevor Lawrence
Yeah.
kind of team. And obviously, I'm not going to try and say his name, but the QB DJ, he was on the Netflix show
Yes.
at one point as the backup QB. But he looked so good. Everyone thought he was going to be a really, really good guy, and I think that almost messed up the Clemson projection, as they wanted to just throw in the next 5-star and them just continue their dominance instead of developing a guy. And I think finally they've had a guy that sat as a backup for a few years. He's going to take over and I think play really, really well. I think just that whole entire they got an easy conference in front of them, and I think that Clemson could sneak their way into that playoffs.
Absolutely. Well, I know we had a couple of more questions we wanted to get to, talking about Alabama and Nick Saban. Is that era changing? Caleb Williams, what do we think about him as a prospect going in the NFL? But maybe we save that for next time, because I've got the station manager telling me that he's about to throw us out of the studio if we don't get out of here. So no, but it's been awesome hanging out with you, Ian, and just talking football. I look forward to it every week. And yeah, any parting wisdom for any of our folks out there, and what we're going to see in football this next week?
um, Motion. I want to see more motion in the NFL, just bringing guys all around on the field. I love seeing motion everywhere. So that's my last statement.
Yeah, love motion as well, especially the Dolphins. Look for some great motion, pre-snap motions from the Dolphins. Just a genius in that way. So anyways, all right. It was great hanging out with you guys. This is Elevated Mission Network channel. Not sure what I'm labeling that yet. In the Ruggles Roundup. Had a great time hanging out with you guys.